Even though we're here in New Hampshire focused on the election that's going to be held in the next 48 hours, there was still an incredible political ad, one that was the best of 2010, and it involves our next guest. Let's take a look.
How do we defeat the Washington machine? First, send career politicians home by enacting term limits. Next, require Congress to read the bills they vote on. Then stop wasteful spending by requiring a balanced budget by law. Stop lobbyists from taking our tax dollars and then using that money to lobby for more. Most importantly, expand our liberty by downsizing big government. I'm Rand Paul, and I approve this message because government is the servant, not the master.
Okay, how many of you agree with that ad? Raise your hands. It's unanimous. So here's my question, Senator. Did you beat Washington in the last year, or did Washington beat you?
We've started. The first thing we did when I got there was we ended earmarks. That was the first vote I took. It was even before I was sworn in. And it's changed the culture in Washington. Now, every time the Democrats want to spend new money, we insist that it come from somewhere in the budget. Now, the Democrats are still insisting that it come from new taxes or from borrowing. But we're insisting that it come from somewhere. So the dynamic of the conversation has changed. But I'll tell you where we're still failing. Republicans are united for a balanced budget amendment, and yet when it comes to $300 million to subsidize local airports or $200 million for Amtrak, we're losing half the Republicans still. So we still have more work to do. And when I ran, I said, it's just not about getting a Republican, it's about what kind of Republican you get. And we have to have ones who will cut spending.
So explain to me, what is it about Washington that you hate so much? Describe it to me.
They don't do what they say.
Dave.
Lack of job creation.
That's it.
I don't.
So you think Washington should be creating jobs?
I think that they should be cutting spending and making tax cuts to open up opportunities for new jobs.
They speak out of both sides of their mouth.
Exactly.
Okay?
Yeah.
One more time.
They speak out of both sides of their mouth.
Explain that.
Okay? Basically, what you want to hear is what I'm going to tell you. And what he wants to hear, I'm going to tell him. Now it's up to you to decipher it.
Alice.
Their priority really is not looking out for us, but who's going to help them and support them with their finances in winning the next election.
Is that your priority?
Well, I think that's one reason why we have to have term limits. I've been up there for about... I've been there for about a year, and I can promise you there's no monopoly on knowledge in Washington. They're normal human beings, and sometimes better and sometimes worse than the average, but we need turnover. Part of the problem is in 2010 we got a bunch of new people, but none of them are in leadership. They're all new there, and we're unable to control the process. We're stopping some bad things, but we're never yet to do good things.
Are you attacking your leadership?
No, I would never think of that.
Can
I retract that?
Yes, but it still ends up there. So send a message to Washington. What message do you want to send?
Well, I want to send a message that they're supposed to be working on our behalf, not in theirs, not to get themselves reelected.
Barry, what message do you send?
You know, we've been looking at some of the cuts in spending, but we look at what Leanna Panetta did last week with Obama, $1 trillion in the military. There could have been a lot of other areas we could have cut. And I was just wondering what your father's opinion might have been on that as well.
Well, I think we need to cut across the board. And the interesting thing is, you remember we had that debt commission, and they talked about cutting $1.2 trillion. You say, well, gosh, that sounds like a good thing. They're going to cut a lot of money. It was all from the rate of increase. The debt's going up $9 trillion over 10 years. So if they meet their targets, the debt still goes up $7.5, $8 trillion. There are people who want real cuts. I'm supporting a plan called the Penny Plan. Cut 1% a year from the budget. It's only $38 billion. You say, well, how could that work? Because it's $38 billion against a baseline of 0. They count it against a baseline that's going up 7% a year. So a $38 billion real cut, they'll tell you, is a $500 billion cut. And they'll tell you if you froze spending for 10 years, they'll call that a $9 trillion cut. And I said, where I come from, that's just freezing spending. That's not a $9 trillion cut.
I got to ask you a question. Where do you and your dad disagree?
Oh, I can't do that today. I'm here to help my dad today.
No, that's fair. No, where do you and your dad...
I was going to ask the same question.
Yeah.
I think that sometimes it's in presentation, but I think in overall message, it's sort of like my wife and I. We don't agree with every issue, but we agree in large terms. I like the idea of constitutional government. I'm a big believer in the original intent of the Constitution and what the founders wrote about it and the Federalist Papers and James Madison and Jefferson and the whole works. But on every exact issue and every exact position not the same, and sometimes it might be a difference of degree. For example, I think we do need less troops overseas. Can it be zero tomorrow? Maybe not. But I do think that needs to pay more for their defense. I think China needs to pay more. Most of the oil going through the Straits of Hormuz is China's. We send China foreign aid, for goodness sakes. That is the most ridiculous thing in the world.
Now, you're not the only Paul who's got good advertising. I'd like to show our viewers at home one of the most effective Ron Paul ads. Let's take a look.
This election is about trust. There's been one true, consistent candidate, and that's Dr. Ron Paul.
Ron Paul has been so consistent from the very beginning.
He seems like a more honest candidate.
He tells the truth about what he believes, whether you like it or not.
He's never once voted for a tax increase, never once voted for an unbalanced budget.
Ron Paul's plan is bold, cut 5 departments. It's what we need.
When he says he's going to cut $1 trillion in the first year, I believe it.
If you don't like how things are going and tired of politicians, he's something different.
Ron Paul.
Ron Paul.
Ron Paul. Ron Paul
is the one we've been looking for.
Such a great ad. Your ads are positive. That ad is positive. I know from the work that I've done at Fox that I have been pilloried by people on the Ron Paul websites.
They're sometimes mad at me too. It does, yeah, well, occasionally, yeah. Just being the sun doesn't always guarantee the love. But you know what? Now that I got such a great introduction, I'm thinking, my favorite Fox announcer might now be Frank Luntz. I mean,
okay.
Sean Hannity. I used to like Sean Hannity, and I'm thinking, you know.
Well, I hope the website sees that. So here's my question: how many of you in this room agree with Ron Paul's domestic policy? Raise your hands. Almost all of you. How many of you agree with his foreign policy? So what do you do?
We've got some work to be cut out, but I think the main thing that I would like to impress, and I probably won't convince people today, but that foreign policy is not always an either-or situation. I brought up the Cuban Missile Crisis, and we talked about that. It's complicated, and we shouldn't always say the response has to be either war or bombing, and there might be an in-between response, and that one person does this. The president does not unilaterally decide this. The Constitution and our founding fathers wanted to divide that power, the power to declare war. The last time we did it, World War II. We were unified as a nation. We fought that war when we came home. That's more of my father's conception of the way we should fight war.
Senator, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And when we come back, Mary Kay Huntsman talks about trust and character, and John Huntsman and the most powerful anti-Obama ad. Coming up right next.